I just flat out don't believe in it. Everything that is driving our economic markets now is not good for biology. So anything that's going to sacrifice any living cell and not protect the DNA in a single cell is a threat to man's long term existence.
This is By Joyan Season 2. I'm your host, Joyan Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Our guest today has led a life shaped by exploration, reflection, and self-discovery. Born in Bayshore, New York, he then traveled west to Arizona and eventually settled in California in 1976. Immersed in the Back to the Land movement, he homesteaded off the grid in Northern California, cultivating a life deeply connected to nature, family, and personal growth. This rich tapestry of lived experience informs his contemplative new work, The Attenuating Puritan, which will be showcased at the London Book Fair 2026 through the Maple Stable Bookstore, returning for its third year at booth 68100. The book follows a modern-day pilgrim as he navigates life's challenges with steadfast faith, hope, and moral conviction. So guys, help me in welcoming the author of The Attenuating Puritan, Robert Gary McGuiness.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's nice to meet you, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for your presence and time you have taken to be on our podcast today. So, the book that you have just released, talk to us about The Attenuating Puritan. What is the book really about?
Well, I've been getting a lot of feedback lately, and it's really interesting to see different people's takes on it. But to me, I wanted to show the connectedness of all the matter on the planet and how the a person can get sick from the environment, and he could get physically sick, he could get mentally sick, and he can get spiritually sick. So I have the main character. He's slightly autistic and ADHD, which was a product of the environment when he was born. But as he travels the journey across the country, I point out that society is physically sick, spiritually sick, and mentally handicapped. And as above, so below, the very same things that happen in the individual happen in society. And it's real important to realize that he's an autistic person, so he has like no social skills and he's very isolated. He doesn't make eye contact. And if you think about that disconnectedness with a single person and you multiply it out over 350 million people, you have isolated individuals with no ability to build a society or create a great society. And we can see the erosion continue in the individual, and we can see the erosion continue in society at large.
So what was what inspired you to write this book? How much of the narrative is based off your own personal experiences?
That's interesting. I used to feel like everything we give or take is polarized. And to accept everything the way it's given to us, we shouldn't share information. We should accept what it is. So I went through most of my adult life not wanting to share information on a level that would be someone running with an idea you had or condemning you for an idea you had because they were polarized, they created conflict, and they didn't accept what it was. As I got older, where I am now, I realized is that if I don't say anything, we're going to miss valuable lessons and people are going to miss the point. And I realize that some people say is that to be a poet in Ireland, you would have to lived a full lifetime before to do all the memorization that it would take to know the plants and the stones and the stars and all the things that writing from rote would take, So I thought, well, I've lived a full lifetime now. Maybe it's time for me to share. Maybe I didn't have the wisdom when I was younger that a lifetime accumulates. So it seemed like it was the right time to say something, and it seemed like I've accumulated enough to share where I could share it without forcing it on anyone, without demanding anything, but just pointing it out and hoping that the change isn't too radical.
So, so this book is not an easy read. So I imagine it wasn't easy to write either. How long did it actually take for you to research and write and then publish the book?
You know what? It really came naturally to me. And believe it or not, it started out as comedy. And it was just fully comedy. I had the line is, and though I am pure in thought, word, and deed, my behaviors occasionally reflect the toxins my forefathers have bequeathed. Oh Lord, must I do the dew? Brominated vegetable oil binds to my iodide receptors, attenuating in my thyroid and mimicking schizophrenia. My, your disciple grows weary, and though I have a pineal gland as large as a grapefruit, I'm uncertain if it's from the ritual fluoridations or a true gift from you, my Lord, of spiritual wealth. With every breath, attenuating, with each and every thirst that is quenched, attenuating, and with every gift from thy bounty, purity through me. Amen. So, I had written that and I felt like an old English Shakespearean actor, and it just cracked me up that he's talking about doing the dew and attenuating brominated vegetable oil, which, by the way, can mimic schizophrenia, which everybody's doing the do and running around everywhere, but don't really realize that it has the ability to make you crazy. And that's one of the things that needs to be attenuated. So, and it's just become such a part of pop culture, that we would advertise that on television and sell it to the young kids and not have any guilt or responsibility, which is, that's a lot of what drives the Puritan is the fact that there's no shame and there's absolutely shameless in from one thing to another thing that really stuck out to me was the Puritan realizes after he's drinking contaminated holy water and attenuating the lead out of the water in Flint, Michigan, that the communion hosts are made out of wheat, which has glyphosate in it, which is ubiquitous. And how could you receive Christ with a complementary carcinogen and justify it? And why would our God allow us to do that to ourselves? So just the absurdity of life at times. And I'd said it is that you're supposed to like cry, and then when you realize what you're crying about, start laughing, and then laugh and laugh and laugh until you're crying again. And then when you're crying again, keep crying until you realize why, and then you're laughing again. And that seems like the absurdity in the life that we live these days. And you can find it in all the packaged foods. You can find it when you look down the block. You can, you know, find it at the gas stations. It's just absolutely everywhere. Is the and I say over and over again, if we took care of a single cell, we wouldn't have any of these problems. We know 5G networks cause cancer, and if you think about cancer, it changes the mitochondrial RNA to print different proteins. Those proteins are proto-oncogenes and have the ability to change the DNA. So, for the convenience of a phone, you're disobeying one of the commandments that says, honor thy mother and father. And if you would change your DNA, you're not honoring the genetic connection that we have to where we came from. And that's really what they meant by honor your mother and father. It's not your actual physical mom and dad, it's a million years of evolution. And if we just throw that away, I say is once the DNA is changed, we lost a phylogenetic memory. And it could be common sense, it could be our innate fear of spiders, but it's something that we just, as a whole world full of people, just disregard and discount it as unimportant. And I see 3 and 5 year old kids on their phones all day, and I'm thinking, we're doomed. That shouldn't be. It's not healthy for the individual, but it's altering our legacy of our evolution. And it's not happening over the course of a million years. It's happening in a decade, right now. And that to me is alarming.
Yeah, and that's why this book is so important and so powerful, and also touches the inherited flaws and the external pressures that you just talk about, whether the food, the packaged food, right? Or AI. What is your take on AI? Affecting our sense of self today.
Well, AI is going to need a whole nother book. And to tell you the truth, I just flat out don't believe in it. And I'll tell you is I've everything that is driving our economic markets now
Yeah.
is not good for biology.
Mm.
So anything that's going to sacrifice any living cell and not protect the DNA in a single cell is a threat to man's long-term existence. And AI is just ridiculous because now we're trying to replace all our work with automation. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that people will not be busily engaged. It just means that they want to consume 1,000 times more, 1,000 times faster. And that's the problem that I have, is that we haven't learned to sit still. We haven't learned to keep our hands folded. We haven't learned to accept things as they come. And it only takes 1% of the population to demand more. I mean, how many Elon Musks could this planet really sustain? You know, he's building robots, he's building cars, he's building solar panels, he's going to Mars. How many people like that could this planet support? And I don't think we can even support one, myself, but it's just absurd that we would have these um, double male chromosome people that feel like they're entitled to this, and there's really no room for that on the planet. There's no room for us. I believe we have to go back to the way the North American Indians lived and realize that we're a part of the environment, and when it's time to die, we die. We use everything, and we never compromise a single living cell without the need for food. And if we don't realize that that connectedness is there, then we're artificial more so than the artificial intelligence. We're not biologic, and we're really losing that fast. So
Yeah, that's beautiful and that's very well put, and that explains. It just I can tell your passion in sustainable food sourcing and everything that you are passionate about. And also this book, right? It doesn't give a lot of clear answers, and it leaves a lot for interpretation for the readers. So why did you choose to write it this way instead of giving a clear message and answers?
well, the one thing I didn't want to do was I didn't want to be demanding people change, and I didn't want to be begging people to change, and I didn't think they would even read it if there wasn't a couple of funny things in there and obvious absurdities, because at the end of the day, what is really going to teach them is if they can, at the end of the book, think it's serious, but still laugh a little bit, because you might be crying, but you still have to laugh because we're human at the end of the day. So I really wanted to present something like that, which was very difficult to do, to tame myself enough to get it out there that way. But from the comments I've been getting recently, it looks like that I did a pretty good job. So, and I didn't know, I never wrote before.
So yeah, talking about that, right? The ending, what you want people to feel or think about when they finish the book. So your character is described as a mirror to the reader. So what do you actually hope people see in themselves when they finish or when they read this story?
Well, I really thought that is if everybody took one piece of the Puritan home with them and focused on one thing, is that we would be moving in the right direction. And, I never, he mentions that you can attenuate greed and you can attenuate lies and things like that, but I don't harp on it. It's mentioned, but then we move on. On the Sermon on the Heap, he mentions that there's more than 400 carcinogenic chemicals in each one of our bodies right now. And then he asks, is your portfolio worth 20 years of your children's futures? Is it worth your grandchildren? And it's just a line, but it's real. And is your portfolio really worth 20 years of your children's lives? So you have to watch where your money, you put it in a portfolio, and then they're investing in things that you're not really comfortable with or that you wouldn't really back, but it's making money, so you're okay with it. And those are the little things that we need to really address because, yes, you can make money, but at what cost? And if we don't wake up to that, like I said, everybody will be trying to be Elon Musk and there won't be anything of the planet left. So we need to, one of the things the Puritan specializes in is sacrifice. And I think we all need to sacrifice a little more. And I don't mean sacrifice because of the laws that are passed or the economics. I mean, actually sacrifice, where we willingly and knowingly give up something because that's what it's going to take. So,
Right. Your story also talk about, it talks about sacrifice in almost every action. And so, in your view, what is the line between meaningful sacrifice and self-destruction? Because it's either money or maybe my family, right?
yeah, well, for the average person, a little thing like don't drink water out of plastic bottles. It's just a little thing, but it reduces the islands of trash that are out in the Pacific. So those are easy sacrifices that we can see. So I think that's a good place to start. When you really get into what needs to be changed, you end up back into the political arena. And I have problems with Monsanto. You have glyphosate on the market. It's a known carcinogen. They put up funds together from lawsuits of over $30 billion, and every single person's still using Roundup. Why isn't it off the market? That's the part that I have trouble with. And it's the same if to where the glyphosate is in the communion hosts, and we're supposedly a Christian nation, and you can receive Christ with carcinogens and then wonder if your faith is strong enough not to get sick, that's a sign of a sick society. That's mentally ill. That's spiritually void. And when you get into the spirituality is you find out that fluoride with aluminum blocks and attenuates, calcifies your pineal gland, which it makes it impossible for people to have a spiritual experience. So we have all these people pretending they're having spiritual experiences when they're not even capable of that. And then we keep having these, mega churches having these big celebrations and everybody feels all enlightened and all lightheaded about it. But there's no spirituality there. There's no spiritual experience. Granted, a gathering of people can be a spiritual experience. But when you void that out and when, people are capitalizing it and rounding people up and putting them in those things without, is I always said is that fellowship is an obex to divinity. And you can't have that divine experience until you go up the mountain by yourself and you sit and you talk to God. So when people are telling you that you didn't show up at church, you didn't do this, that is an actual block to divinity. And the people on both sides of that have no ability to have that spiritual experience. They have no ability to talk to God. They can only look down their nose or at the person next to them and be void of the very thing that they're there seeking. And that is an example of the spiritual void that the Puritan finds in society. We don't have the ability to have a true spiritual experience. We don't have the ability, not for each and every one of us, to have some degree of mental illness. They found a spoonful of microplastics in the brain of every human that they tested. A spoonful, and you got to think the microplastics are so small that they pass the blood brain barrier. And just picture that whole spoonful of plastic in your brain. It's absurd. It makes me want to laugh, and then I'll start crying, and then I'll start laughing, and then because that's how absurd it is. And it's not just here. Those plastics are
Yeah.
global, So even in Africa, there's young African children with a spoonful of plastic in their brain now. I mean, there's no sacred ground anymore. There's no forest that you can hide in. There's no place where it's not raining plastic or snowing plastic. It's ubiquitous. We are killing the planet. So the Puritan points a little bit of that out, and that's the part of the attenuating Puritan. He tries to absorb as much toxic matter as he can, and then tries to have enough faith that he will be okay at the end of the day. And he's not asking for help, and he's not shying away from anything. He's actually drinking leaded water. He's eating glyphosate. He has liver failure. He's attenuating drugs and alcohol. You know what I mean? He's across the board trying to clean up the Garden of Eden. And that's what makes him a great hero, is the fact that he's lost in his own world, and he's not afraid to do the impossible. At the end of it, him and his young girlfriend put genes in them to eat the island of trash. And the genes they found in a bacteria in a landfill in Japan that actually digest plastic. So it's not just passing it through, but it's actually breaking the polypeptide chain, or the poly chains that make the plastic. And they put them in them, and then they got all the enrons to go so that they would actually work. But now they can eat and digest plastic. He's not afraid, just him and one other person, to go and eat the island of trash. Initially, I was going to make it like a world war, and the 99 percenters rounded up the 1%, and they put the genes in them and banished them to the islands, and they were forced to eat it. And I said, well, that's a great story, but it doesn't teach responsibility.
Mm.
It places blame somewhere else. It doesn't take the responsibility. I said, what would really be a good, valuable lesson is if one person said, I will do it,
Yeah.
and that's the lesson that each one of us needs to hear. I can do it. I will do it, or die trying, right?
And you are actually taking actions. You are actually doing some of the most impactful work to our environment. You have been involved in the oak restoration as part of sustainable food sourcing. So that just translates into the stories, the book, and you are actually doing something for everyone, for humanity. So can you share what the work looks like and why it matters to you so much and personally that you're actually being involved in it actively?
To tell you the truth, is when I first came out to California, I lived in the hills. Then there was an accident in my family. My partner was killed. My 20-month-old son was severely brain injured from a log truck that drove off the road. And she passed away. So for the next 20 years, I just took care of my son, and there's lots of seizures, lots of therapies, lots of medications, lots of surgeries. You know what I mean? He stayed comatose for months. And when I got him back, he couldn't even sit up, So we had just years of that, So the land was always dear to me. And people ask me, why did you stay with him? And I was like, well, when you live on the farm, as if an animal is sick, you take care of it, I said, and that was my son. That was more important than any animal on the farm. And that was my duty. That was my job, So he still lives with me. But the oak, it was so important to me because it was leading back to what I was talking about, the indigenous peoples and the food that they ate. Now we have almost a drought proof crop, almost a fireproof crop. It doesn't need irrigation, and it produces year after year. And it produces a food that can lower your blood sugar. It's high in protein. It has everything you need. And when you let the light into the forest floor, you get the crops on the ground. Could be mushrooms or forbs or some of the other plants. And you can get your berry crops in there too, or your intermediate canopy stage. And it brings in the wildlife. So it does all these beautiful things, and it also just makes it look gorgeous. And it's where we should be. We should be part of that land and living off of it. And that's what I was saying is that, you know, the Indians didn't need attenuating the way we need attenuating. You know what I mean? So it's yeah, and to me it was natural. That was just what I wanted to do with my life anyway. It was the right thing to do. Again, it wasn't vogue when I was getting into the idea, but it's become more vogue now, and more people are doing it. You can actually find some acorn flour on the market now, which is not easy to find and it's not cheap, but it's very good food. So, anyways, I think that we all need to find our niche in the garden and survive in harmony with it. And I think when we do that, I think we will treat each other better. I think we will know more than we know. So there's other things that solidify who I am. One of the things is I've never driven, so I don't drive. And I did all the stuff with my son, but I still didn't drive. I got to where I needed to go, but I didn't drive. And I never owned a cell phone. So it was those two things alone are very important to me. You know what I mean? And it's not just talk to talk; it's walk to walk.
You don't have a cell phone?
I don't have a cell phone,
Wow, I thought I heard wrongly. Wow, I'm impressed.
and I never did, and I don't intend to get one.
So do you have, how do people call you or contact
I
you?
have a I have a landline, and
Right.
it doesn't have an answering machine. It's just a landline that rings. If I'm here, I'll get it, and if I'm not, it'll just ring. So,
Wow.
but I do have this now.
Yeah.
So we can do this. So I'm connected.
Wow. I'm just like, wow, I respect that, you know. And also you have so many hobbies right now. I understand why, because you don't have a cell phone and you have all the time in the world to do all the things that are, out
Well,
there.
I'll tell you, I don't have a cell phone, but a company called the other day,
Uh-huh.
and we're making an Android game of the Attenuating Puritan.
What?
Yeah, so there'll be a little game with a little guy that's going around attenuating, and hopefully we can teach the youth to make better choices. So,
Yeah.
um, as I was against it, but they convinced me that the world needs it. So, and I don't know, as I'm crying and I'm laughing and I'm crying and I'm laughing. So, we'll see how it goes. But I think that could be a very good thing. And the kids I see that are adults I see are 8 hours, 10 hours a day on their phones. It's a disease. And they don't even realize it, and you can't tell them because they won't listen. I wrote another story recently, and it's called the NAMSCS, and it stands for the North American Mass Shooters Cultivators Society, and they're at a convention center in Texas, and they're giving awards away for who cultivated the best mass shooter. And they have guest speakers coming in. They have early childhood development specialists. And some of the people are just saying is that it's really important to ignore your child. It's really important to put them in a two-dimensional reality where they have complete control over deleting anything that makes them uncomfortable. And these are the things that lead to developing a great mass shooter. So it's all tongue in cheek, but it's a serious story. And you read it once and you think, oh man, that's too much. And then you start thinking about it and you're like, um, it's really a travesty, but that's the state we're in now. I expect to get that story published in another book in the near future.
Yeah, I was about to ask that, like, what is coming next, but yeah, you just answered that. Um, yeah, I mean, I just want to say that, yeah, well done, congratulations on the Android thing, because I think that's the one of the fastest, easiest way to get to the people, adults, youth out, today, because they are always on their phone, like you said, right? Even me, right? I don't realize that until I speak to you today, right? I'm always on my phone, if not my phone, my laptop, right? Always on my devices, and that's just, like you said, a disease that I need to pay attention, to. And so yeah, thanks for that reminder. So yeah, you see, so for people like me, what is your advice for us? Because we can't, I mean, we can't, yeah, realistically, technically speaking, we can't really live without our phone. So what can we do to minimize, I don't know, like the usage or the attention
You
span?
know,
Yeah.
you're in business, so you have a business life to run. But I tell people all the time is that phones are for business strictly, and whales talk to each other 400 miles or 800 miles away without it being in vicinity. So when you don't have a phone, if you really needed one, all you have to do is think about your loved ones, and they will hear you. And whenever you put a phone in front of it, you block that signal. You block your voice being heard. You block them from hearing you, and it's that connection that we have with all living things that is real. And we erode not just our abilities, but we erode the very fact that we've had these spidey senses for a million years. Animals that aren't even as far developed have those same senses. You know, they had that remote viewing program after the Civil War because every time a Northerner got shot, the military would slowly take the body back to the family, and sometimes it would take months. And they'd get there, and the family knew when they died. And it happened so many times that the government said, we have to look into this remote viewing because how come all these people knew when that happened? They died in Pennsylvania, and the family knew it in Maine, and it happened 6 months ago, and they knew that they died 6 months ago, and they were like, the U.S. government kept that program up into the early 1990s. For 130 years, they were looking into that. And it's kind of made fun of in the movie The Men Who Talk to Goats, but that's what that was about with the guys in the padded rooms deciphering Russian intelligence that they never saw with the remote viewing capabilities and the ability to communicate with goats, which was, like they made it a comedy, but at the same time, is that was based on a real program that we had here in America. So
Yeah.
those senses are real. The thing is that they can't make money off of it the way it is. And they can't make money off of me if I'm thinking about a loved one, unless I'm on the phone or typing or something like that. So I say is as much silence as you can get, as much opening yourself to the universe is the same amount of time that you have to put stuff into the universe. So it's a two-way street, and we are part of that as it is part of us. So it's important to always remember that and don't disregard that for convenience because you're not being all that you can be in that state. And I could say that to a million people and 999,000 of them will just disregard it. It's unimportant. Yeah, but, and I'm like, well, we make those choices.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think because they are just not, I don't know, I mean, I like I listen to you, I'm the 1% or 0.001% that will listen to you, because I know only in silence, in when we sit with ourselves, when we listen to ourselves, when we are not with any of our phones, or that's when we connect to ourselves, or with God, with the universe, right? That's when we can get all the answers that we've been looking for.
Yeah,
I believe that.
there's so many things that need a little bit of money, so it's hard not to want to pursue it, and even if you're just giving it as charity or something, there's so many things that need it that it's hard to ignore it. We have to have a little bit of that in our lives.
Yeah.
It's a tool. It's not an end. It's a mean, and it needs to be treated as such. But it is a tool, and it's a good tool to have.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'll talk to you about is, you are, I don't know how old, how young you are, but you are also teaching yourself piano, right? You are learning piano. So
Well, I'll tell you, I'm 72 now. I don't know how I got here, but here I am. Yes, and I'm teaching myself piano. I played guitar for years, so could read the guitar notes. But I thought as I got um, aging more, it would be better if I could read two staves at the same time, one for the left hand and one for the right hand. And as I read more complicated stuff, I would be, it's just so wonderful because it's fine motor and it's gross motor and it's your auditory system and it's your vision and it incorporates the entire brain. It's your dreams and it's your hopes and it's everything. You know what I mean? And it's just such a thing to stay youthful by engaging at that level. I'm adamant about putting my time in each day and seeing where I get with it. I'm not going to live long enough to get great, but I'm learning.
you are gonna live long enough, because you are done so many good stuff. I think you're gonna live long enough to fulfill all your missions and purpose.
You know what? There's things I accomplished on the piano that felt good to me. I never read the bass clef before, so getting my left hand to respond to the bass clef and then learning the notes, it was pick and peck, slowly as it goes, but now I can incorporate them, and again, not great, but I'm not just doing one thing and then the other. I'm actually doing it both at the same time, which I thought was just like riding a unicycle and juggling at the same time. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, I can actually do that. So,
Yeah.
so I'll keep at it, and I enjoy it, and that's the
Yeah.
other part of it. So that I think that's another part about how it keeps you youthful, doing something that you enjoy
Exactly.
and growing brain at the same time, and trying to do it the right way. So.
But you see, it's always fascinating for me to talk to people who are slightly older than me, or like my parents' age, and because they're just, I'm sure you know this as well, right? People who are in your generation, your age, they have this, I don't know how to put this, but they have this, they don't want to learn, right? They don't want to learn anything new, whether it's AI or like social media. It's just like, it's just not for them. Of course, I'm not saying they should learn, but anything like music, like, like having hobbies, right? So I'm just saying, like, what advice would you have for people in your generation to embrace the learning, like learning something new, because they think they don't have time, or it's too late for them to learn anything new? Like, what would you tell them?
Oh, I don't know who I would have been had my life been different, you know, but as my son's sole caregiver, I feel like I have to be here, and I can't be here sitting back. I have to be engaged and I have to be capable. So that has me thinking is that I need to stay physically in shape. I need to keep mentally in shape. I need to be present, and I work towards that. So so it's easy for me, and I don't know if anybody else has the same motivations that I had, but with that motivation, of course, it's easy. And I don't try to look backwards. I always try to look forward. And I say some stuff that happened in the past and stuff, but I try to really move forward. I try to take each new day as a new day. and I try not to be worrying about yesterday's stuff tomorrow. I think that's another trick to aging gracefully is greet each new day. Don't carry burdens with you, and enjoy the time that we're here.
Yeah, beautiful. So yeah, thank you so much, Robert. So what are you looking forward to next? Your next book, when is it gonna be released?
Well, actually, I have two books that are in the works. They're not quite done yet. One of it is the sequel to the Attenuating Puritan, and that, that's 90% done already. So, and then I have another collection of short stories, and I told you one of the short stories that'll be in there, but they'll come out within a couple months of each other, and probably in, well, I'm not sure how long the editing is going to take, but it should be out in the next, I'll give it 3 or 4 months.
That's quite, yeah, quite fast. I mean, it's gonna be this year, right? That we are talking about. So, is there anything else you really want to talk about? Perhaps I didn't ask you, I didn't let you before we end.
Um, well, I think we covered most of the stuff. I've been really excited about several reading groups that picked up the Attenuating Puritan this month. There was 4 different reading groups, and they're having Zoom discussions about the reading material. And at the end of the month, at least for a couple of the groups, they vote on the books, and then the ones that uh, place well, they get reviews written, and then some other prizes happening. So I'm really excited about that. Is right now on Goodreads, I have 164 reviews, and 152 of them are 5-star reviews. 11 are 4 stars, and then I got one 3-star review. So it's absolutely amazing. One of the reading groups is presenting a reader's guide to the Attenuating Puritan. So when they have these group discussions, they can break it into different parts that they should look at, and then they have lists of questions for the readers, and then they ask the readers to list more questions. So it's really amazing to see the depth and the intellectual conversations that it's generating. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited. Um, Company is now making a screenplay for the Attenuating Puritan. I mentioned that we have a Android game that's being developed right now. So this character we might be seeing more of him. And the book people love the attenuating the robe that he wears, the robe of repentance that pixelates when he has sinful thoughts, and they're thinking that's just beautiful. And then I had a piece of jewelry made, which is in the book. It's called the Attenuator's Pendant, and it's a crucifix that's surrounded by the nuclear ellipses. So it's actually the design's already been done, and it's going to be a couple of weeks before I receive it. But that's like and I wrote it in the book as not to be the Christ, but to realize that the suffering that man has on the planet is like the Christ in the fact that it was injuries that were caused by man, the same as that man killed the Christ, and that each one of us, as we attenuate, have a spoonful of plastic. We have glyphosate. We have cancer molecules in us, 400 cancer molecules. We have radiation exposures. So to put the nuclear ellipses around the crucifix and say, I am not the Christ, but I suffer the same as. And it's the suffering that man has given us to suffer. So to me, it's a very important piece of jewelry, and to me, it symbolizes a lot more than jewelry. So, and I don't mean to not be thinking highly of Christ or talking down on it. I'm just saying is that the world we live in today is not the same world that it was 2,000 years ago, and whether we realize it or not, we are all suffering
Yeah.
and that's what that crucifix symbolizes. And like I said, I don't want to be sacrilegious or talk out of line, but I want to make a point. So I'm really excited about that. And of course, if the Puritan gets to the screen, he'll be wearing it.
Yeah, 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 exciting. I'm really excited for that. Now, thank you so much again for your time. It has been such a
So nice to meet you. I look forward to talking with you again in the future. Maybe
oh,
next
I
time
would
we can
love
do the
to.
other book.
Sure, for sure. Yes. Perfect. So, guys, for everyone listening, you will find all the links and resources mentioned in the description below, including the link to purchase the book on Amazon or any other major retailers. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss a conversation coming to you every Wednesday. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag _podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.